Okay, if there's one thing that depression and anxiety makes you good at, it's telling porcupines. So whether it's a little white lie, such as blaming your Prozac tremors on like having a double espresso or whatever, or something more elaborate like staging this happy-go-lucky existence for Instagram when in reality you feel like you're dying inside. I think we're all sort of guilty of it to an extent. And it's self-preservation. I think in a society where mental illness makes you a sort of emotional leper, lies are sort of like the vaccines that inoculate you from being ostracised. So my go-to lie was to blame every low or anxious mood on having a headache, which is sort of like the perfect affliction to fake, because they explain away any signs of like outward agitation and they're impossible to disprove. So, you know, it's like get invited to a social event, can't, got a headache, you know, maybe next time. Feeling shit and depressed and people are sort of mithering you like, you know, what's up with you? It's just like, now I've got a headache, leave me alone. About to have a panic attack in public. Sorry, I need to go home, my fucking head's banging, whatever. And I think as long as you've confided in at least one or two people, then there's nothing wrong with playing your cards close to your chest. You know, not everyone needs to know your business, fuck them. But there's another kind of lie that I was guilty of telling in the early days of my battles with depression and anxiety, and one that isn't quite so innocuous. And it's a lie that I used to hear sort of week in and week out by a lot of people at the mental health support group that I used to run. And if you're subscribed to this channel because you're fucked in the head like the rest of us, then I suspect that you're probably guilty of telling this particular lie once or twice yourself. Now, it's nothing too elaborate. In fact, it generally consists of 6 words. But what's interesting about this particular lie is that it's not even a lie that's necessarily intended to deceive people, because when you tell this lie, even you like to think you're telling the truth. So what you're actually doing is you're lying to yourself first and foremost, and then just lying to everybody else as a sort of a side effect. And it goes a little something like this. I tried that, it didn't work. Yeah? I tried that, it didn't work. So in the early days of my battles with anxiety, depression, whatever, because I'd never actually experienced anything like it before, sort of my knowledge and understanding of what was happening to me was elementary at best. You know, I had no real idea about the possible underlying causes of why I felt the way I did. All I knew was that I wanted to fix it, and I wanted to fix it as quick as possible. But in my rush to find answers, I had this sort of haphazard approach to research that was both like broad but shallow. So whether it was like, you know, meditation, exercise, CBT, I wasn't interested in the finer details, like the science or the research behind any of it. It was more just like, just give me the instructions for fuck's sake. Like I'm not interested in all the brainy bollocks. Just tell me what to do and let me crack on with it. So it's like, you know, cardio 3 times a week, fine. Meditation 20 minutes a day, let's do that. Cut all processed food from your diet, good, let's do that. But no matter what I tried, and I tried pretty much everything, nothing ever seemed to work for me. You know, my mood, my anxiety never seemed to get any better. And apparently I'm not the only one. In the 3 years that I ran the mental health support group, according to all the feedback I received from people about their own experiences with like various self-help techniques, I'd estimate that the success rate of self-help approaches to depression or anxiety, and by success I don't mean like miracle cure, depression vanishes into thin air. I just mean like a noticeable improvement in mood. I'd estimate that the success rate with people doing self-administered protocols of those things to be less than 10%. Now, what's interesting for me about this observation is that it stands in complete contrast to the results of clinical trials, which in the case of depression, for instance, have demonstrated a success rate of about 60% for exercise, 58% for CBT, and about 52% for meditation. You know, depending on which studies you look at, it does vary. In fact, hang on a minute. Before we go any further, little side note, you have to be wary of people on channels like this bandying studies and statistics around, okay? And especially wary of these motherfuckers that say shit like, studies have shown, but then don't actually cite any sources. So I'm going to put my sources in the video description below. Also, Always be wary of anecdotal evidence as well. So this 10% success rate that I'm claiming to have witnessed, I mean, I haven't just pulled that out of my ass, you know, that's based on conversations I had with the people at a support group that I used to run, that I hosted once a week for 3 years, you know, thousands of members, hundreds of conversations, and, you know, basically, very rarely did I hear definitive success stories about self-help approaches. And if I was being completely honest, I'd actually say it was probably less than 5%, but I've decided to sort of err on the liberal side, just so as not to be sort of hyperbolic for the sake of emphasis. But that's still anecdotal, you know? And I mean, I can say, oh, you know, but I'm being honest, I wouldn't lie to you guys. But of course I'm going to say that, you know? And that's the thing, without any sort of actual documented evidence, you don't know whether people like me are telling you the truth or just spinning you a load of bullshit to try and push our own agenda. So just be wary. That's all I'm saying, like pinch of salt and all that. Okay, so 10% success rate versus 50 to 60% in clinical trials. But let's go apeshit conservative and then cut those figures in half and assume it's really only 30% success rate in clinical trials. That's still 3 times more successful than I've seen self-help to be. So what exactly is causing that discrepancy? And the answer, I believe, is primarily self-deception. So more often than not, when we sort of look back at our failed attempts to remedy our own mental health issues, when we say, I tried that, what we really mean is, I kind of tried it, or I tried it a couple of times. And when we say, it didn't work, what we really mean is, it didn't work quickly enough, or we didn't enjoy it, or we just weren't disciplined enough. Now, even though what we're effectively guilty of is expecting too much too soon, or just too much of an easy ride, it's not always immediately obvious, because in most other new endeavours, making speedy progress and having fun while you're doing it aren't entirely unreasonable expectations to have. So for instance, I mean, you can quite literally attend your first guitar lesson having never picked up a guitar before in your entire life, and then leave like an hour later having memorised 3 chords, and then go home and strum away to, well, quite literally dozens, if not hundreds of different pop songs. Same with like learning a new language or learning to drive a car. You can see the results almost immediately, and then that makes it fun, which sort of fans the flames of enthusiasm to carry on learning. You know, it's actually sort of easier and more fruitful in the early stages, and then only becomes more difficult and more nuanced the further along you progress. But when it comes to engaging in techniques to sort of alter brain chemistry or change cognitive processes, that supercharged learning curve gets turned on its head, because results are usually a lot slower to present, so, like sometimes even non-existent in the early stages, and then still very subtle when they finally do kick in. And it's only in the later stages that the results begin to accumulate to any sort of significant degree. And that's why I think it's very easy, and therefore very common, for people to become disheartened and end up quitting in the early stages of remedial mental health pursuits. And even though that impatience is understandable, I think more often than not, it's unjustified. And in the cases where it is unjustified, it's because the impatience is being jacked up by a sort of unconscious dismissal of the terms and conditions laid out by the program or the technique that we're attempting to engage in, which in plain English basically means you ain't fucking doing it properly. I mean, this was certainly the case with me back when I was claiming that things like, you know, diet and exercise and meditation weren't having any effect. The reason they weren't having any effect was because I was attempting, through this sort of weird paradoxical combination of haste and laziness, to sort of employ the techniques in isolation of the parameters within which they were designed to be effective. So in other words, I was ignoring, say, the 90-day aspect of the diet program, or the daily aspect of the meditation course, or just the fact that nowhere in any of the literature did it say that doing cardio was going to be easy, let alone enjoyable. I mean, truth be told, I don't know of a single quick fix approach to any mental health issue that's taken seriously by the scientific community. You know, most of the studies demonstrating that, like, the benefits of things like CBT, exercise, meditation are all between like 6 to 16 weeks in length. Even antidepressant medication supposedly takes about 6 to 8 weeks on average to start working. I mean, there is evidence for single dose psilocybin being effective, but I mean, you know, until that becomes widely available, we're stuck with these less immediate solutions. But when you're in the depths of depression or racked with anxiety, like 6, 8, 12 weeks is a fucking long time to wait to see results, which is why a lot of people quit. You know, I mean, even in clinical trials where you've got a team of therapists and counsellors there to provide you with support and leverage, even they tend to see a dropout rate exceeding 30%. So I mean, if you're doing this stuff at home by yourself without any support whatsoever, it's easy to see how this dropout rate could, double or even triple that. And one of the problems with "I tried that, it didn't work" is that with a little sort of semantic sleight of hand, with a little semantic sleight of hand, you can convince yourself that what you're saying is the truth. So say you were supposed to do CBT for 10 weeks and you did a week. Well, that's 10%, okay? You did 10% of the work, but you don't feel 10% better. So it clearly wasn't working and it wasn't going to work. Therefore, I tried that, it didn't work. But I'd class that as the same sort of slippery get out clause that like a cheating husband might conveniently employ when his wife accuses him of sleeping with other women. And he's like, "Oh, baby, I swear on our children's lives, I haven't slept with anyone else." Because he hasn't slept with anyone else. I mean, sure, he's been shagging the arse off 10 tarts from Tinder for the past month, but that isn't what he's being accused of. He's being accused of sleeping with other women, but, he's never so much as taken a power nap next to a single one of them. So technically, he ain't lying. And this, I suspect, is exactly what many people are guilty of doing in relation to their own lack of success in trying to remedy the depression or anxiety using self-help techniques, substituting the word tried for temporarily dabbled. And well, I know that to be the case because that's precisely what I was doing. Now, when it comes to the question of how to go about sort of cultivating discipline, that's another video entirely. But on the question of what to do about deceiving ourselves, the best way to put it is this. In the absence of being earnest, so that is in the absence of being serious in one's intention, purpose or effort, you just have to be completely, brutally honest with yourself about it. So if you didn't enjoy doing like mindfulness meditation or you find like running too strenuous, fine, no big deal. If anything, that's a good thing because that's like an honest analysis of the situation that can help you reevaluate your approach. Maybe you'd be better off trying Vipassana meditation or guided meditation, and instead of running, maybe you could try something like low intensity yoga or something like that. But in convincing yourself that it was the technique that was lacking rather than your commitment to it or the way you approached it, and then dismissing the entire project as inadequate or fraudulent, all you're doing there is sort of limiting your options for recovery based on a false evaluation and leading you to potentially dismiss an approach which, had you actually stuck to it for the prescribed measure of time, could have been of some benefit to you. Also, being too quick to dismiss an approach that seems to work for lots of other people, I think that can quickly begin to contribute to this illusion that you're somehow incurable, like you're a special case, like, CBT worked for millions of other people, but it didn't work for me. It's like, wow, I must be really fucked up. And apply this dismissive approach to every half-assed attempt at the options available, and pretty soon you're going to find yourself locked inside a prison of your own making, like a prison made of walls that are just this mirage constructed entirely of false testimonials that have you convinced that you've got nowhere else to turn. Also, depending in whose company you make these claims as well, the consequences might be further reaching than just the end of your nose. So let's say, for instance, you choose to claim that you've tried CBT and that it didn't work, like CBT is useless, and then you go and post this opinion on a mental health forum, or you tell this to a friend who's going through a shit time and they're thinking of trying it, and in reality you didn't try CBT, you just sort of dabbled with it for a few days and got bored with it, but they don't know that. Then they hear your denouncement of CBT as a waste of time because it doesn't work, and then on your condemnation alone, they decide not to engage with it, despite the fact that it could have been actually effective for them. And I don't think the importance of that point can be overstated. Truth be told, there's a limited number of legitimate options available to people struggling with mental health issues, legitimate as in adequately studied and clinically verified. And we do a disservice to those methods by denouncing them based on false testimonials and, which only serve to sort of unfairly destroy the reputation. Now, don't get me wrong, right? I'm not saying that we should never criticise any of these methods or techniques simply to avoid discouraging people who might possibly benefit from them. You know, on the contrary, they should be scrutinised to the nth degree so that the methodology can be refined and perfected. But in order to scrutinise the efficacy of any therapeutic technique fairly, we have to be reasonable about the basis on which we scrutinise them, particularly when the technique in question requires a certain level of input and commitment from the person participating in it. So, you know, is it really fair to scrutinise an 8-week daily meditation program based on a few days of sporadic engagement? And it's like, well, is it fuck? I mean, that'd be analogous to a chef judging the outcome of a meal based on the recipe in a cookbook, but completely ignoring how he went about following the instructions. So, scrambled egg on toast. Well, it says use 4 eggs, but I haven't got any eggs, so I'll just use a couple of turds. It says cook in a frying pan, but mine's in the dishwasher, so I'll just use this rusty old hubcap from my garden. And then serve on lightly toasted bread. Well, I haven't got any bread, so I'll just spread it on the back of this raccoon carcass that's been left out in the sun. Oh look, my scrambled eggs taste like shit. I'm not using that recipe book again. Go on Amazon, leave it a 1-star review. Rubbish cookbook, doesn't work. On the other hand, let's say you did complete an entire yoga or meditation program, like down to the letter, and it really didn't work for you. Well, now your evaluation of that approach is of genuine value, you know, both to the people who developed it and the people who are maybe thinking about trying it, because, you know, you can now offer up a detailed analysis of your own experience, which the creators can use to sort of refine the technique, and the public can use to make a truly informed decision about whether or not it might be suitable for them. More valuable than that, though, is what the experience has taught you. You know, you now know that meditation or yoga really isn't the answer for you. But in seeing the entire process through from start to finish, you've cultivated your ability to follow through, and now you can seek out other methods without sort of looking back over your shoulder and confident in the knowledge that, like, the road before you has narrowed based on conscious refinement and not just pure self-deception. So with all this in mind, you know, maybe it's a good time to look back over all your past efforts to fix what's going on up here and ask yourself, you know, that CBT course, that exercise regime, that diet program, did I really try it, or did I just dabble with it? Was it that it didn't work, or that I didn't do the work? Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, if you have been guilty of this, I'm not calling into question your commitment to the cause. You know, I know you want to be able to see these things through, and I'm not underestimating the amount of resolve it takes to complete these mammoth projects with any level of consistency when you're in a bad place. Believe me, you know, I've been there. I mean, fuck, it took me 4 years and numerous half-assed attempts before I finally managed to muster up the resolve to stick to anything for longer than a fucking week. All I'm saying is that, you know, should you call it quits at any point or deviate from the plan too much, that after the fact, in hindsight, you just be honest with yourself about it. Be honest about your level of adherence to the terms and conditions, just so as not to misremember the experience and thus undervalue the potential inherent within that particular approach. So, you know, if you only managed 3 days of that 12-week CBT program, or you only quit McDonald's for 2 days, or if that exercise bike you bought, if that was turned into a fucking coat hanger just 1 week after buying it, fine, no big deal, but just be honest about it, you know, for your own sake. Also, I'm not saying that if someone asks you whether you've tried this or that therapeutic endeavour, that you have to embarrass yourself by admitting that you didn't really understand it, or that you just weren't committed enough at the time, you weren't disciplined enough to follow through. Just say, no, I haven't tried it, because that's the truth. And with that kind of honesty, you leave your options open to revisit certain approaches when you're good and ready, you know, for a fresh start with a refined approach and a clear conscience, instead of backing yourself into a corner that doesn't exist because of failures that didn't technically happen. So, you know, whatever it is, whether it's CBT, diet, meditation, exercise, casting a spell, fucking greasing your ass cheeks up with margarine, like my great grandma used to say when we talked about fisting, don't knock it until you've really, really tried it. See you later.